Hi, everyone. My name is Gianna, and welcome to my Work in Progress Talk 1. I'm going to be explaining where I'm at currently with my project and what I have planned for it. Thank you all in advance for your feedback. I really appreciate it. So, my project is going to be on lower body injuries in the NFL. I'm going to be investigating the relationship between playing surface and player injury. So, what is the reason that I chose this problem? Why analyze injuries and player performance in the NFL? So, there's a couple of reasons why I chose this issue. One being, I definitely in my future career, I do aspire to be in sports analytics. It's something that really interests me, and football is probably my favorite sport. So, I definitely wanted to work on something that I was going to enjoy researching and working on. So I looked into some of the biggest issues going on right now in the NFL. And one of the topics of great debate, of course, in general, is injuries in the NFL and how we can avoid them. But more specifically, I wanted to look into is the NFL risk of injury rate higher on artificial turf versus natural grass? And of course, there could be other contributing factors towards injury in the NFL. So I'm also going to be looking at some other major factors contributing to lower body injury in the NFL as well. So to give a little bit of background, right now, out of the 30 NFL stadiums, because two are shared, 16 use natural grass, while the remaining 14 use artificial turf. So, an important question to ask is why are these NFL teams switching to artificial turf? So, one thing about the artificial turf compared to grass is there's little to no maintenance needed throughout its lifespan. So, this helps a lot when during the busy NFL season, when a lot of time is spent on that field, the the less maintenance the better, and by having less maintenance it helps to prevent any major maintenance issues from arising during the game throughout the season, and it can definitely save them money and time. Another important aspect of this is throughout the couple years there's been lots of investigations on lower body injuries in the NFL, and a good amount of them have demonstrated notably higher injury rates on artificial turf compared with natural grass. So I definitely wanted to look into this and do a little more research as to why this is happening. I did read in The Athletic that natural grass, what it does is it will eventually give when a player is wearing cleats. So it releases the cleat prior to reaching an injurious load. But then, as opposed to synthetic surfaces and turf, there's less give on turf, meaning that players' ankles, feet, knees, it absorbs that force, which makes injury much more likely to happen, which can be very dangerous. So, how has the NFL approached this issue so far in the recent years? So there has been, which is a very good sign, a large growth in injury related investigations. So it's definitely being studied and being looked into. In 2016, the Field Service Safety and Performance Committee was established. This committee was established by the NFL Players Association in 2016 to perform research on injuries and to use this research to advise on things like injury prevention, improving testing methods, like since they have to test the fields prior to the games, and adopting other techniques to evaluate the field service in general. There's also been biomechanical studies of cleat surface interactions, so the interactions within the fields and the cleats. The NFL also uses special equipment, and I didn't even know this, such as sensors, radio frequency, ID, otherwise known as RFID tags, and video analysis to collect player data. So there's so much data that they're collecting, and we don't even know it. They're using this data to better understand the injuries and how they're happening essentially. And it's all, of course, to recommend ways that we can avoid these injuries from happening in the first place. So although some studies have deduced that there is an increased risk of lower body injury on artificial fields, there has been some debate over the last few years as to whether this is the major issue, and this is the largest contributing factor to lower body injuries. Just to give a little summary, in 2018 and 2019, the American Journal of Sports Medicine study, there was a study that claimed that playing on these turfs did increase the risk of lower body injury, and it actually had a causal effect on injury rates due to the synthetic turf's lack of ability to release an athlete's shoe, as we just mentioned before. But what this brought from individuals like Jeff Miller, NFL's Executive Vice President of Communications, Public Affairs, and Policy, he responded to the issue by claiming that the lower extremity injury rates between natural grass and synthetic surfaces over the past few years has decreased to the point where it's almost non-existent right now. So he is basically claiming that the data has grown since it was taken back in 2018 and 2019, and that because close to half of the NFL teams are using artificial turf and natural grass, it's the point where there's an increased rate is almost non-existent. So basically rejected the entire claim. Moving on to 2019, there was a response to Jeff Miller's claim, such as one from Dr. Tim Kremchek, who was a Cincinnati Reds orthopedic surgeon for 26 years. Basically saying that the statement was irresponsible, and given all the data that we've collected, the data is all significantly skewed toward using natural grass turf. So in regards to being safer. Then in 2021, according to the NFL, the rate of lower body injuries on turf versus natural grass were essentially the same. So 2021 was the year that it kind of evened out, so to say. And so in response to this, individuals like the union president for the NFL, J.C. Tretter, he called this outcome of 2021 an outlier. So he believed this wasn't representative of the whole and of the true relationship that turf has to lower body injury. And most recently, in 2022 and 2023, this was postseason after this most recent season ended. There was an ESPN article that claimed that non-contact injuries for the NFL players occurred at a higher rate on artificial turf compared to grass during the 2022 regular season, according to the data provided by NFL Players Association. So the data since 2021, the data is now showing again that there's a higher risk of injury on artificial turf. So this also proves that 2021 was in fact an outlier. So given all of the history and the research throughout the years and the advancements in the studies that they're performing, my question becomes, should analysts focus on investigating the risk of injury on artificial turf versus natural grass? Or should we be focusing on analyzing the risks of injury on both surfaces in general, and less on the relationship between injury and playing surface? This leads me to my goal with this project. I want to determine the relationship between lower body injury and playing surface. I definitely want to study this given the recent debate. So is the rate higher when playing on artificial turf versus natural grass? And I want to find out by how much. Is it a large amount? Is the risk much higher, or is it just a little bit higher? I also want to determine the association between lower body injury and all of the other variables in the data set that I chose. which I will show momentarily. Some other variables included were position, weather type, play type, what type of play was going on when the injury occurred. So which variables interact with player movement to heighten the risk of injury outside of just the playing surface? So lastly, I want to build a predictive model to help assess the risk of lower body injury for all players in the NFL. And I want to use this model to make recommendations for avoiding injury in the future. For my data set, with the help of Rachel, one of the things, I had a little bit of trouble finding a data set at first due to one of the struggles I found was because injuries are related to, they're technically medical information. It was hard to find a lot of data in one place to avoid data integration. But I did end up finding this great Kaggle competition that was put on a couple of years ago, an analytics competition called NFL First and Future. For this competition, the NFL offered Kaggle a way to take the data set provided, which included 250 player in-game histories from 2 consecutive NFL regular seasons, thanks to Next Gen Stats, and research the relationship that the playing surfaces had on player injuries. Of the 250 player in-game histories, 100 of the players sustained 1 or more injuries, which included non-contact lower limb injury, where turf interaction is likely to have happened. And the remaining 150 players represent the sample of the larger NFL population, those that did not sustain a non-contact lower limb injury. So the data set provided, for this competition, they had provided 3 different CSV files called injury record, play file, and player track. For my project, I will only be using 2 out of the 3 files provided: player injuries record and player plays list. Injuries record gives information about the injuries that occurred and certain variables, which I'll go more into detail in the next few slides. The play file, so player plays list, includes information like the game, field, play information at the player play level. I chose not to include player track data in my study because due to the large size of the data, simply just not having the application space to download the data, and it would be a little more difficult to work with what I'm doing. So I chose just to go with the player injuries record and player plays list, as that would be sufficient enough for this study. The injury data file, as I mentioned, contains information on 105 lower limb injuries that occurred during those 2 regular season games over those 2 seasons, 2 consecutive regular seasons. The player injuries can be linked to specific records in a player history using the field's player key, game ID, and play key. And it gives thankfully, the competition laid out the format for each field and a little bit of a description of what that variable was. So DM-M1, these are days missed, indicating 1 or more days missed due to an injury. And DM-M7, same thing, but indicating 7 or more days. So these were the binary variables, 1 meaning yes, 0 meaning no. For the playlist data file, this file contained the details for 267,005 player plays that made up the data set. So this one had quite a few more variables there, but it entails details about the game plays, such as the roster position that they're on, the type of stadium, the field type, weather at the time of injury, play type, position for the play, and position group. that they are in. And again, each play is indexed by the player key, game ID, and play key fields. And the format of the variables are shown there with a little description as well. As for my analytical plan, this is still open to discussion and edits and updating. But as of right now, from where I am still in, as of right now, still in the data cleaning stage. One thing about this data is, as I'll talk a little bit more about in the next couple of slides, it was organized, but not as uniform as I thought it would be in regards to spelling and format and uniformity just of the variables. So within this week and next week, I'm planning to clean and prep my data a little bit more, so it's easier for me to work with. And I'll definitely be incorporating any feedback I get from this work in progress. For week 5, I'm planning on fitting the regression models. One for the relationship between injury and player surface, of course. And then after that, after getting my results for that, I'm gonna dive into the relationship between injury and all the other variables presented in the play data set. So that should take me a good amount of time, given that after my data is cleaned and I'm ready to work with it. So I'm excited to do that. And then for week 6, I will be looking for any gaps basically in my analysis plan. And if I do find any gaps, anything that I feel like is missing, I can add new methods or new analysis within there. Definitely be reviewing my results, identifying anywhere that I'm still struggling and I need to change anything. And by that time, I'll be trying to prepare my work in progress too. And then finally, in the last couple of weeks, hopefully, I'll have my analysis and results finalized. And I'll also be incorporating any feedback I get from the work in progress too. And preparing the title and abstract for my report. And of course, recording my presentation and submitting. So as for my data prep, this is the step that I'm still in at the moment. So I'll still be cleaning and pre-processing the data for a couple more days, I'm sure. One thing I really needed to do was reorganize and redefine my variables. A couple of examples of this. For the variable stadium type, a lot of the data was the same, but misspelled. For example, one had the correct spelling outdoors. There was our door. There was OUDOOR as well. A couple of examples of the possible data that was in there. I'm going to be grouping all those types of data into one outdoors, and then the same goes for the indoors. Same thing for the weather. This happened with a lot of the variables in the data. There was data pieces, there was cloudy, fog started developing in second quarter, things like that, where I'm going to recognize them as the same name, but I'm going to redefine them to all be cloudy, for example. This way, I believe, just for me personally, it'll be much easier for me to work with this data and to visualize it within graphs and within charts and to perform analysis in general. For my analysis, I'm going to be using our programming tool and I'm going to use regression analysis. I'm going to fit, train, and test a model. I really want to build a predictive model so that I can use my results to determine what the relationship is exactly between lower body injuries and player field surfaces. So the playing surface, what exactly is the relationship? And can we determine the risk of injury based on what surface that they're going to be playing on? Also, I definitely want to determine the most significant factors contributing to lower body injuries in general in the NFL, as there's definitely some other major contributing factors here. I'm going to use this predictive model to make recommendations for how players and the NFL can help players avoid these injuries in the future. Again, like I said, I thought this was quite interesting to study, but I also felt that it was my responsibility, if I have the opportunity, to know what we can do to prevent injury. I think that's a very important idea to look into. So lastly, I have a couple open questions. In general, prior to any of these open questions, my biggest one was just the order of presenting my information. So I want to make sure that I'm presenting it in a way that's clear, and I'm explaining everything in a way that's clear and in the correct order. If you think that there's another way that I can share my project, whether it's the order or the way I'm sharing it, please let me know. I'd really appreciate the feedback. My background information slide was one that I had a question on. I want to provide enough sufficient background to what I'm studying, why I'm studying this in the first place, why it's important, but I also don't want to include too much to where it becomes not applicable anymore. And I want to only include what's important. So from right here, I believe that the slides I included were all pertinent, but if I'm worried that I included too much. So please let me know your thoughts on that as well. And lastly, do you think that there could be any gaps in my analytical plan? Do you believe I'm missing anything significant, or what are some things that you do in between each of those steps that are helpful to you throughout this project building process? Any pointers in that aspect of this project? I really appreciate any feedback that you all can give me. Thank you all. And thank you, Rachel, so much for your help with this. I'm looking forward to hearing all of your feedback. Have a great night, and thank you so much.